just to give no decision today. Presentation. It is advertised as a commission meeting, so if you wanted to take some action, you could, but there's no action being requested. But we will talk.
Good morning. Great.
We will talk about next
Good morning.
steps.
Well, it is 8:30. I don't know from the city if y'all are waiting for anyone specifically, or if we want to go ahead and get started.
We're waiting for one more commissioner. I'm gonna see if he's on his way. So give me 1 second, please.
No worries.
We will get started as soon as possible after 8:30.
Hey, Sarah and Maurice, do you guys have plans to share the presentation, or would you like me to share the presentation? What would be easiest?
Hey, good morning, Matt. Yeah, I'll go ahead and share the presentation.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead and start on the screen when you get a chance, and let's make sure that the city can see it.
Hey Matt, and when we're ready, I can kick off.
Okay, thanks, Sarah.
Okay, Matt, we have everyone here, but before we start the presentation, we actually have to start the meeting, so I'll let the mayor do that. And then we'll kick it over to you guys, and then and just so you're all aware, we have the Safety Harbor City Commission. We have employees that you've been working with on this for the last, I don't know, year and a half. And then we have residents, mainly of Bishop Creek. Are there other residents on Mullet Creek here, or is this mainly Bishop Creek residents? Okay, all right, okay, that's what I thought. So just want to let you know who's in the room. We're in our city commission chambers in Safety Harbor, and we're all anxious to have a discussion. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the mayor so he can start the meeting.
All right, good morning. With that, we're going to call the meeting of Friday, October 20th to order, and I'll turn it over to the Army Corps of Engineers.
All right, thank you guys so much. I will go ahead and get it started. So my name is Sarah Spear. I am the planning technical lead for this project, and this is the City of Safety Harbor Floodplain Management Services presentation. So we also have Maurice Vaughn on the phone. He was the modeler for this project, and we have Matt Filer, who was the engineering technical lead. We sit in the Jacksonville district of the Army Corps of Engineers, which is in the South Atlantic Division. Next slide. All right, so a little bit about floodplain management services. So the authority for this is Section 205 of the Flood Control Act of 1950. So FCMS projects provide technical services and planning guidance. So we don't actually construct anything. We write a report and do analysis and hand it over to the non-federal sponsor and say, if we were to construct this, this is what we would recommend. So it is 100% federally funded, but like I said, we do not construct anything with FCMS projects. Usually FCMS projects are very flood-based, so timing, duration, frequency of flooding. This project is a little unique. We kind of focus on erosion due to flooding along Bishop Creek and Mullet Creek, and that was at the request of the non-federal sponsor in a letter that we got in April of 2020. So like I said, product received, we give you guys a report. We give the non-federal sponsor a report detailing the problem identified by the project delivery team, the PDT, and the non-federal sponsor. It goes through the plan formulation process, kind of how we got to the best performing alternative. We have environmental and cultural resource compliance. So if you guys are to construct it, this is, we lay out what you guys would need to do. And then we identify the best performing alternatives and kind of everything that goes along with that. And in addition to the main report, there's also an engineering appendix. And this is kind of where you get into like the nitty gritty details of the analyses with the hydraulics and the hydraulics. And it, application of the modeling to evaluate the best performing alternatives identified. So what happens next? Once we give the non-federal sponsor this report, most customers use the report and the engineering appendix to apply for grants or other funding opportunities so that they can go ahead and construct the best performing alternatives that the Corps identified within the main report. And I believe that City of Greenville, just last year, applied for a grant based on the SPMS that we provided to them, and they got funded a good chunk of their project. So that's kind of what we focus on when we're writing the reports, is like, how can the customer use this at the end of the day? Next up. All right, these are the areas of interest that we've identified. In the early stages of the project, we walked through kind of both of these residential areas with the non-federal sponsor and some of the team members from the Corps, and actually pointed out these specific areas of interest. So there's 7: Rainbow Farms, Sheriff Hughes Ranch, Harper Woods Village East and West, and Belgium Street Bridge and Footbridge, and then 5th Street Pond. Later on in the formulation process, we actually combined 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, just based on proximity and kind of the same erosion issues going on in that area. And as you can see, go ahead.
So can I just jump in real quick? So just so the residents know, and the reason these 7 areas of interest were identified is because these are areas of interest that residents in Safety Harbor have concerns over. So just so you're all aware. So that's why there's 7 of them and not 1. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you for that. Oh, thank you. All right, so as you can see in the picture, there's the watershed boundaries. So there's Bishop Creek and Mullet Creek each have their own respective watersheds. So we focus on, the watershed within Bishop Creek and the watershed within Mullet Creek, and identified areas of interest in both. Next slide. All right, these are all of the alternatives that we actually considered. So these are not what we're recommending. These are just broad picture what we looked at. We identified multiple alternatives per location, and then, kind of narrowed them down between Bishop Creek and Mullet Creek. So Maurice will go into a little bit more about the best performing alternatives, but this is everything that we looked at. Next slide. All right, and I will pass it over to Maurice to talk about the actual modeling. Thank you. Any questions on that before we move on?
No, we're good. Thank you, Sarah.
All right, hearing none. Take it away, Maurice.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Maurice Vaughn. I was the lead modeler for the project, so I'm going to go through, give an overview of the modeling software we use, sort of the process we went through to calibrate and validate the models, then discuss some of the issues at each of the locations, and then I'll go into the recommended or best performing alternatives for each. So to perform the modeling, we use the HEC HMS model, which is a hydrologic model. For this project, we use that software to process the radar information for the calibration and validation events. And we also use that to delineate the watershed boundaries to determine the overall model domain. For the actual computations, we used the model HEC-RAS, which is a fully integrated hydrologic and hydraulic model. It's capable of computing the excess rainfall, so it accounts for losses due to soil and evapotranspiration. And again, we use radar-based gridded rainfall for calibration and validation events. So the point of doing calibration and validation is that we want to actually model a real event and then make sure that the model can actually produce reasonable results based on some observations that occurred during both of those events. So the calibration is really the main one, and then we run the second storm, the validation event, just to verify that, all right, the model's working for both conditions and we're not just setting the model up for one particular scenario. For the actual evaluation of the performance of the alternatives, we actually developed synthetic rainfall storms. These are hypothetical storms, and they're based on NOAA Atlas 14 annual maximum series rainfall. Right, and so the model is set up, it's fully two-dimensional, so it's highly detailed and captures all the features within the watershed. I've got some slides to show that detail later. It also includes hydraulic structures within the two-dimensional area, including the major bridges, culverts, and weirs throughout the system. Okay, so the figure on the left is an image of the topographic information that we applied. This is from 2019. It's the latest available LiDAR-based topography from the USGS. You can see in the dark bold line, that is the overall watershed and the model domain. It includes both the Bishop Creek and the Mullet Creek watersheds. You can see the total area of it's about 4.5 square miles, with Mullet Creek being the largest of the two.
Maurice?
Yes?
For those of us that aren't engineers, what does the red mean and what does the green mean?
Ah, yes. Okay, so basically starting over here, the lighter, wider gray colors, that's the highest elevations, and it's basically sloping down, so the red is a little bit lower but still high ground. The green is even lower elevations, and as you can see, these even lighter green colors, those are within the floodplain or down near the channel. So that's the gradient. The elevation scale here ranges from -10. That's just out near that's actually out here in the bay. It ranges up through elevation of 100. I don't think it actually gets to 100, but that's just the scale that we used for the display. Just to kind of show the features, highlight them within the topo data.
Thank you.
Okay, so for the calibration event, we analyzed Tropical Storm Elsa, which occurred July of 2021. The storm occurred pretty close to when we started the modeling project. So we had some good information from the city on observations in the area. There was about 3 to 4 inches that came within about a 2-day period. So this plot on the left is actually just showing the accumulated rainfall over time throughout that simulation period. That's over here in the southeast corner. And again, this is the gridded rainfall data. This is similar to what you'd see on the Weather Channel when you're looking at the weather forecast. And basically what we're seeing here is these warmer colors indicate higher rainfall, and the warmer colors, or I'm sorry, the cooler colors, the greens, indicate lower rainfall. So it varies across the basin between 3 and 4 inches. All right, so similarly, for the validation event, we analyzed Tropical Storm Debbie. This occurred in June of 2012 and had a lot more rainfall associated with it. As you can see, there was approximately 11 to 12 inches across the watersheds over a 2-day period, with most of that rainfall occurring here in the western area of the model domain. Okay, so for the synthetic design event rainfall, again, this rainfall data was used to compare existing conditions. So we set up an existing conditions model, and then we also looked at various alternatives to see how we can improve the performance of the system. And so the idea here is that we want to apply the same hypothetical rainfall events to both scenarios so that we can get an apples-to-apples comparison. So for that analysis, we applied the NOAA Atlas 14 annual maximum series rainfall. The hypothetical storm we applied is a 24-hour duration event, and we looked at recurrence intervals between 2 through 100 year. Those have an annual exceedance probability associated with them, as you see here. So a 2-year has a 50% chance, and a 100-year a event has only a 1% chance of occurrence. The table here shows the distribution or the range of rainfall associated with those events. So we're ranging from 4.6 inches for the 2-year event and almost 13 inches for the 100-year event. And the plot below just shows how that rainfall is distributed through time. So over that 24-hour period, so for instance, the 100-year event, that 12.82 rainfall, that's the total volume of this storm throughout the 24-hour period.
So Maurice, Tropical Storm Debbie was a 100-year event?
That one was over the course of 2 days. So we're looking here, this was a little bit more of an extreme event because this rainfall would occur within 1 day.
Okay, I understand.
So yeah.
Okay, versus 2, okay.
All right, so obviously both Bishop Creek and Mullet Creek are tidally influenced. They discharge into the old Tampa Bay area. We gathered the gauge data from the NOAA gauge closest to the project area, which was located at Old Port Tampa. And then the figures below, this one to the left is for Tropical Storm Elsa. So this is actual observed stage within the bay. And also with Tropical Storm Debbie, the observed stage within the bay for that simulated period of time. This is actually applied in the model, so we're actually modeling this down at the downstream end of the model domain. For the synthetic design events, we applied the mean low water. And this is based on NOAA datum right near the modeled area. So the mean low water is minus 1.25. And I've also got, for comparison here, the mean high water level in that same datum. The reason we applied the mean low water for this project is to, since we're most interested in erosion and high velocities, we wanted to ensure that we were capturing the greatest head loss throughout the system, which would generate the greatest velocities throughout the system. So this is a overview of the HEC-RAS two-dimensional mesh. As you can see on the left figure, all the blue lines, these are break lines within the 2D mesh. And these are what define the features within the model that include roadways, flow paths, ditch center lines, creek center lines. We've also delineated some of the major reservoirs and other ridge features that will affect how the water flows throughout the system. And the figure over to the right is just a zoomed in area to provide an example of what that mesh resolution looks like. So we can see here the resolution along all the roadways is about 20 feet. Within the channels, it's highly detailed because we wanted to capture what was happening, right? We're interested in the velocity within the channel. So we've got a 10-foot spacing throughout the main channel reaches for both Mullet Creek and Bishop Creek. And then the areas in between have a maximum spacing of about 80 feet. Okay, so for the hydraulic structures, we were supplied the 2006 watershed management plan for the city. That included both survey information and also the hydraulic model that was used for that study. So we actually pulled out that information and incorporated that into our model for 21 structures that we modeled explicitly. These are structures that are close by and affect the results within the areas of interest. Then we included an additional 50 or more other structures located upstream. You can see those in these green points. These structures were included just to allow the water to flow as it normally would. Since we're not actually interested in the exact hydraulics, what's happening around these structures, we didn't include those explicitly. But we did test them, ran the model with all of them explicitly, and with some of them burned into the terrain, as you can see here, and verified that there was no significant difference between the model results. It was mainly done for model efficiency. We saved ourselves about 6 hours in model simulation time by doing that. Okay, so for calibration results, Tropical Storm Elsa, we didn't have any actual gauges or surveyed high water marks from this event, but we were provided a visual observation along Mullet Creek at 9th Avenue North, as you can see in this lower left-hand figure. There's a culvert here that's shown over to the right. It's an arched culvert. The observation was about 1 foot below the crown of the culvert. That's about elevation 10 feet in AVD. The model actually computed about 9.6 feet. So we have pretty good confidence that the model is performing well in this area. The plot above here is just showing how the water level rises throughout that simulated period. Okay, so for the validation run, Tropical Storm Debbie, again, no gauges or surveyed high water marks, but we were provided a map of observations with photos for various locations throughout both the watersheds. I'm not going to go through every one of those for this presentation. I'm just going to highlight a couple of the most severe areas. And this one is the most severe, I think, and it's located along Bishop Creek, and it's, I think this is about 100 feet or so downstream of Harbor Woods Village Drive. And we can see that the model computed velocities in excess of 8 feet per second, which are highly erosive. The figure to the photo to the right is a photo from Tropical Storm Debbie. We can see that the existing gabion wall structures, those are the existing bank protection measures that are there, failed, along with the fences and a significant amount of erosion behind that. So, you know, these gabion wall structures are quite porous, and over time, if there's roots that, also these creeks are heavily vegetated. So in this photo, you can see the geotextile behind those gabion walls. So if roots penetrate those areas, it can actually pull through it over time, soil, and you get soil loss. And eventually, you know, if you got high velocities in the channel, you can see failures like this occur. So it looks, so basically our validation seems reasonable in this area. This is another location where flooding was observed during Tropical Storm Debbie. This was at the intersection of Green Springs Drive and Huntington Lane, right here at this intersection. You can see the photo here. The model computed depths of ranging between 1 and 2 feet across this intersection. Seems to match what the photo is showing here. All right, so I'm going to go through now each of the areas of interest, and I'll touch on what some of the major issues were, and then we'll go into looking at the model results and recommended plans. So for Rainbow Farms, there were accounts of bank erosion, some settlement occurring in the backyards adjacent to the creek banks, and some collapse of fences and other structural features north of some existing cutoff walls about in this location. So the area of interest is basically from here up through Rainbow Farms Drive. This area, the channel is relatively narrow with steep side slopes and with some heavy vegetation growth in that area. Okay, so this is a snapshot of model results for existing conditions. And this is for the 100-year synthetic storm event. And so what we can see here, you're looking at the colors on this map. Basically, blue indicates This is actually a velocity plot, by the way. So the blue indicates low velocity, or next to zero, and the warmer colors indicate higher velocities through the system. The little white particle tracking, this is just basically indicating the direction of flow, sort of the magnitude and speed of that flow as it's moving through the system. It's notable here that along Pine Hill Drive, you see a significant amount of rainfall that's coming from the north off of Tall Pines Drive, and it's basically funneling down through this. There's a right-of-way or easement here between these two homes where water is entering into Bishop Creek. And we also are seeing that this water is overtopping the road here and bypassing across the abutments here. We're seeing a fair amount of water coming off of Brookside Drive. And so this water over time, can start to, as I mentioned before, start to erode the banks of the channel here, and over time carry with it soil and basically exacerbate the problem through time. I'll also note that there is a ditch here along Tall Pines Drive that intercepts water from the north and carries it south towards, there's a large reservoir here for the outfall. So, as Sarah mentioned previously, we looked at various alternatives. This is the one that we landed on as being the best performing alternative. I'll go through some of the features associated with this one. To start off here, this Tall Pines Drive ditch, we're looking at expanding the ditch. Basically, we want to widen it out to about 6 feet at the bottom and with about 2 to 1 side slopes. This is about an 835 foot linear foot reach that extends from the outfall at the reservoir upstream past, forget the name of this road, it's not Tall Pines, or Pine Hill Drive, sorry. So we're going to improve this ditch. We also noted that there's water collecting here on the road, so we're proposing to add a flume here to allow water to enter into the ditch at this location. And then expanding the existing culverts, both of them actually. So the one at Pine Hill Drive and entering the reservoir to 6 foot wide by 3 foot wide concrete box culverts. Okay, so the idea here is that we would be able to accept or intercept some more of that flow that we saw flowing this way and route it south before it gets to Rainbow Farms Drive. So the idea was there, if we can get less water moving through the system, we can reduce the water levels in this problem area and hopefully reduce the velocities as well. In addition, we're looking at expanding the Rainbow Farms Drive culvert. This is a 10 foot wide, 5 foot high concrete box culvert. These dimensions were selected as basically the largest culvert we could fit in there without doing any other major roadway improvements or expansion upstream. And also installation of cutoff walls along both banks downstream of Rainbow Farms Drive down to where it would tie in with the existing cutoff walls. This would result in removal of the existing channel banks and any other existing bank protection measures that are there. And at the end, you would have about a 20 foot wide channel in this area, and it would extend about 270 feet downstream. All right, so what we're seeing here, I'll switch over to the next slide and show some of this is a comparison of results between existing conditions and the alternative 4 scenario. On the left-hand side here, this is a comparison of water surface elevations for the 100-year rainfall event. Blue indicates 0 change in water level. Red would indicate areas where there's new inundation or increased inundation, and green indicates a reduction in water level. So we can see that along this area, we're seeing reduction in water level throughout the problem area, and even more reduction upstream, and this green will actually extend several hundred feet to the west off the screen here. And then also here, if we're looking at the Tall Pines Ditch area, you can see some reduction in water levels upstream of the improved culvert in the ditch, all the way downstream, and we can see that by doing this, we're not affecting the water levels inside that reservoir. There's still over 2 feet of freeboard on the berms of that reservoir. See some little red strips here, that just indicates that, well, since we widened the channel, that area is now getting water there. So on the right-hand side, this is a comparison of velocity. And again, it's the same sort of color scheme. So we are seeing some, oh, I just lost. Can you guys see my screen?
It just went off.
Yeah,
It was there, but it went off.
Okay, how about now?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so velocity, all the velocity changes, even though we're seeing changes here in this map, all these velocities are less than a foot per second. So we are seeing a little bit of increase upstream due to the increased conveyance capacity, and we're seeing some slight reductions downstream throughout the problem area. We're seeing a little bit of increase just due to that additional capacity within the Tall Pines Creek area. All right, the next area is the Sheriff's Youth Ranch. The problem here is basically water is accumulating along this ferry lane. There's not a curb there currently, or during at least the time we visited, and the water finds this pathway to get to Bishop Creek, and it's an unprotected area. It's just a grassed area, and over time, the city indicated that over a span of about 3 years, that the bank had eroded about 10 feet closer to this road. Here's a snapshot of 100-year rainfall, and basically what's happening is this shallow concentrated flow is making its way here and finding its way down towards to Bishop Creek. In this area, the velocities in the creek aren't an issue. They're actually less than 2 feet per second. So that's not the main issue. It's really just we need to find a way to armor this area and direct the flows to get it to where we have a basically an engineered outflow for this system here. So we've got 2 alternatives here. They're both relatively equal. They perform the same. It's just a matter of which one's more cost effective or availability of materials and that sort of thing. But we're looking at adding in about 200 feet of curb and gutter through this area to capture and direct that flow towards, and this alternative would be construction of a flume, a 3-foot wide open flume to capture the water at the curb and just direct it down to the bank of Bishop Creek. This would include some backfill here in this depressional area, and then probably some grassing and also some riprap protection at the base here. And alternative 3 is pretty much the same. The only difference here is instead of using a flume, you would apply just a standard curb inlet, and then have an 18-inch diameter pipe that would flow out towards the Bishop Creek area. All right, now we're moving on to Harper Woods Village. This one has similar issues to Rainbow Farms, but more extreme in a larger area as well. So similar, we've got bank erosion, sinkholes, settlement of backyards adjacent to the banks, collapse of existing bank protection measures such as the gabions we showed in the previous figure, fences and other structural features. And again, that area I showed you for Debbie is right here at this 90-degree bend. So really the problem areas kind of extend from that area upstream, really throughout this area before we get to this other 90-degree bend. And again, the channels are relatively narrow here with steep side slopes and heavy vegetation growth. Okay, this is a snapshot of the existing conditions model results. Again, we're looking at velocity plots. So the blue is basically zero velocity, and the darker reds indicate high velocities. So we can see we have some elevated velocities throughout this whole reach, and they really pick up downstream of this Harbor Woods Drive area and really extend all the way down through this railroad area. Down past this bend, the homes are further away from the creek. There's more natural area through here, so this area is not really that much of a concern. It was mainly throughout this area here. So again, we looked at various alternatives, including home buyouts and conversion of some areas to reservoirs and widening the channel. Due to the proximity of the residential properties to the channel, there's not much room to widen the channel or flatten the banks out or to use it. Other types of bank protection measures in this area other than using a vertical cutoff wall. Vertical cutoff walls are effective at increasing the conveyance, reducing the water levels throughout the area. While it doesn't reduce the velocities, the cutoff walls are designed, and they can handle the increased velocities or the high velocities that are currently there. They also will protect from basically the erosion or carrying of water, or carrying with sediments and soil from the backyards where we're seeing sinkholes. Cutoff walls will basically prevent that from happening in the future. So here we've got, these are the model results. You can see significant reductions in water level throughout the system, all the way up through to Hardwick Lane. Basically, it's all green here. We don't see any increase in water levels downstream, which is always a good thing. And in terms of velocity, again, we are seeing some increases in velocities within the channel. That's just due to the increased conveyance. It's now a 20-foot wide channel with vertical banks. But the big thing here is that the velocities in the overbanks, where we had that overbank spilling, are no longer there. And we're seeing reductions in all across the board through the area. Okay, moving on to Meldrum Street. This area also experienced bank erosion and failure of the existing bank protection measure, which in this area is an articulated concrete mattress that lines the channel pretty much from 9th Avenue North through the railroad bridge, all the way down down to this footbridge. And we could see in some photos, I don't have them here in the slides, but you can see where large trees and the roots had started to crack some of the articulated concrete mattress, and in some cases those areas, the concrete mattress was actually sliding down the slope. This area has really high, really steep slopes. In these cases, it's 1-to-1 or even steeper in some areas. So this is a bit more of an extreme area than the other ones we looked at in terms of steepness of the banks. Channel's a little bit wider here. It's about 10 feet wide at the bottom. Okay, so for existing conditions, model results, again, this is a 100-year. We're looking at velocity. You can see really high velocities, greater than 8 feet, closer to 9 feet through this, 9 feet per second through the railroad area. The channel here, it's relatively flat through this area, but there's a steeper section coming out of the railroad and through this area. So we're seeing that velocity really pick up. A lot of rainfall is being collected on 9th Avenue North, which is basically coming around the culvert here and overtopping 9th Avenue North. There's a fair amount of water coming out of this ditch from the south. And in this neighborhood directly north of Meldrum Road, or Meldrum Street, this water here is uncontrolled. There's no curb along this road, so this water just sheet flows over the bank, right? And those articulated concrete mattresses there with the cracks and the vegetation, that water is able to get behind there and over time can erode and basically deteriorate the foundation, cause the failures over time. This is a little bit further downstream. It's a similar situation. Here's the footbridge for reference, Meldrum Road. In this image, you can see more water here from the south that's coming out of this developed area. There's a depressional, maybe a detention pond here that is that does overtop and it kind of intersects with this flow that's coming out of this developed area, and it finds its way through this area and spills over into the banks, which is likely causing some of the erosion we're seeing in this area. Okay, so for Meldrum Street, alternative 2 ended up being the best performing alternative, and we looked at several other options. This particular one, the main features are installation of vertical cutoff walls that would start here downstream of 9th Avenue North, would run through the railroad bridge and tie in all the way down to just downstream of the footbridge, right before this tributary intersects with Mullet Creek. It also includes about 700 feet of curb and gutter along the south side of Meldrum Street, so that water that's flowing out of this neighborhood can be intercepted and taken down towards this outfall. I believe there's currently a small flume there. This would be upgraded to a standard curb inlet, the 24-inch pipe that would allow the water to drain directly into the creek. On the south side here, we're proposing to add in a small swale. Well, it's a 3-foot bottom width swale with 4-to-1 side slopes. And about 180 feet, this would sort of pick up the water here that's coming out of this, from this cul-de-sac area, and also the water that's coming out of this depressional area, directed towards another. This would be just a standard ditch bottom inlet that would have a pipe leading to Mullet Creek. Also would note that these cutoff walls, we propose to wrap them around this bend here, because there is a fair amount of flow that's coming from this ditch from the south. I will note, because it was brought up in some previous meetings, that we did analyze some of the potential for GeoWeb in this area, and due to the GeoWeb requires a flatter slope than what's here, and due to the proximity of the infrastructure such as Meldrum Street and the berm that runs along this area, those options would encroach and effectively remove this area. So this ended up being our best performing alternative. In terms of model results here, we're seeing some reductions in water level right around the downstream of the railroad and downstream through this area. Not a whole lot downstream of there. And in terms of velocities, we're not seeing a huge difference really. There's some areas that are a little bit higher and some that are a little bit lower, but overall it's all these changes are less than about 2 feet per second. So it indicates that we're not getting rid of the velocity problem, but with the cutoff walls, we're providing protection to withstand this kind of scenario. All right, now the last area is the 5th Street Pond. This area, as you can see, the Mullet Creek wraps around has a few meanders as it goes around this pond. This is the Fifth Street Pond. Fifth Street Pond has got an elevated berm around it, and around this outer side of the channel, there were some indications of erosion occurring here. The channel is wider in this area and also has flatter slopes. Steepest is about 2 to 1, but we're also seeing some that are up to 4 to 1 side slopes. So this area is lends itself to other bank protection measures. This is a snapshot of the model results for 100-year, and we can see that overall the pond embankment is relatively in good shape here. The water level doesn't really get up to the toe of the pond itself, and the velocities around here, the blue is indicative of relatively low. Most of the higher velocities are around the outer bend, which we expect, and this is some of this for an extreme event like a 100-year event, we can actually have water that bypasses some of these oxbows, and those are areas that would be hot spots for erosion. So for our recommended or best performing alternative in this area, it would just be application of bank stabilization along this outer bend, starting here, wrapping around this area, just along the slopes. All right, and so this is that's all the areas. This is just a summary of those best performing alternatives. So for Rainbow Farms, again, it's just addition of cutoff walls, replacement of the Rainbow Farms Drive culverts, widening the Tall Pines ditch, and then replacing the culverts on that ditch and adding a flume just north of Tall Pines. That's about a $1.1 million cost associated. And then for the Sheriff's Youth Ranch, this would be the application of curb and gutter with either a flume or a curb and inlet pipe. Both of those would be around $20,000. Harbor Woods Village, this is the installation of cutoff walls along that entire reach, which is about $2.4 million. Meldrum Street, we've got cutoff walls along with the curb on Meldrum Street and the curb and ditch bottom inlets along the north and south bank of the creek. That one's about $4.4 million. And at Fifth Street Pond, just the application of bank stabilization along that outer bend of around the pond area is about $96,000 for a total of about $8 million. So with that, I'll open it up for questions and discussion.
Maurice, I have 2 questions. Well, 1 comment, 1 question. Can you go back to the last slide real quick? So just, I mean, if there's any good news, that is that Meldrum Street is county owned. So the 4.3, I'm sorry?
A portion of county owned.
Okay, so can you explain that, please? Can you come to the mic and explain that? Portion is county owned, so that's a full 4.3.
Correct. So the portion of Meldrum Street that is county owned is from the railroad tracks to the footbridge.
Okay, so from the footbridge on would be our responsibility.
Correct.
But, okay, so likely less than 50 to 75% of that would be our responsibility.
And the county is already in design for that section.
For their section.
Correct, for improvements to that section.
Okay, thank you. And then can you go back to the Harbor Woods Village slide, please? Yeah.
Which one? This one?
That one will work, yeah. So the question is, the vertical cutoff wall stops at some point. Yeah, right there. The question is, why doesn't it continue another, what amounts to 7 properties, 4 on, I think the north side and 3 on the south side. So the question is, yeah, why doesn't it continue to the open area just south of the park?
Yeah, so we stopped it here. Looking at the topography here, you can see that the floodplain here flattens out, so we don't have nearly as much encroachment with the actual homes. And also, there's just more flow capacity here. So, and also in the model results, let's see if I can get here. Yeah, so down here, we're not seeing as much of that overbank flow from the properties into the creeks. So it wasn't necessarily showing that area was having the same exact issues, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be extended downstream. That's just where we stopped it. We didn't want to go overboard, basically. Trying to be as conservative as possible.
Okay.
The further
As cost goes.
the sheriff's youth ranch, is that their property? That's not the city property.
You're correct. So the Sheriff's Youth Ranch is their property. Correct.
And the Fernery Lane belongs to them.
So that loop is their property.
Gotcha.
So our,
That might be beneficial for them to know, so they
can you go back to the second to last slide, please, Maurice? Yeah, the one with the cost. So our biggest two are Rainbow Farms and Harwood Village, right?
I was just wondering.
I'd like to speak up for the county. This is Jennifer Shannon. We stopped working on the Meldrum Street design based off of this study. Usually when we work on stormwater improvements with other municipalities, we share the costs by who owns what percentage of the watershed, so you could wind up paying more than 50% based on the percentage of Safety Harbor that's in the Mullet Creek watershed, and maybe even have to share some of it with Clearwater as they're at the most upstream end west of McMullen Booth Road. So you might want to look at the percentage of Safety Harbor in the Mullet Creek watershed before, while trying to understand the budgetary responsibilities to that piece.
Thank you.
Maurice, I wanted to follow up a question after Matt's question on the vertical cutoff walls. At the termination of the wall, how does the model take into account potential erosion right at the end of the wall? Is the model transition that the velocities have dropped to the point where at the end of the wall, the velocities are not enough to cause erosion at that point? Or just, you look at the models and you still see red at the end of the walls. But what happens at that point? I would be concerned about, or would like to know that at the end of the wall, all of a sudden you're not creating an erosion place that you didn't have before.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So the model itself here is not actually calculating erosion, but we're getting an idea of what the velocities are here through the system. And so you're absolutely right. At the end of the cutoff wall, there would be some additional analysis that would be required to determine how much, it could be riprap or some other measure to transition from the cutoff wall back to your normal natural channel bank. And so that's really something that it's beyond the kind of scope of this effort, which is sort of a feasibility to look at it. But if you're going into design, it would be required to go in and look at that in a more focused sense to determine, what's actually going to happen and how much riprap or other bank stabilization will be required at that transition zone.
Okay, thank you. So you.
That would apply to any of the areas that we've talked about here.
So some sort of trade-off study at that would be either extend the vertical wall a little bit more to deal with the lower velocities, or this riprap or something like that. But that would be in addition to what's shown on here. Is that correct?
So within, Sarah, maybe you can help answer this, but we also did a geotechnical analysis that included some additional features that I didn't discuss here. So what I talked about today was just basically the modeling aspect of it. But we did include within the cost, other construction costs such as, clearing and grubbing, and also the additional riprap or other measures that will be required in order to actually construct it. I don't have all those details with me.
Hey, this is Sarah. Yeah, I don't have that right in front of me either, but we have transmitted both the main report and the engineering appendix to the non-federal sponsors, which in this case would be the city of Safety Harbor. So if, I guess, Matt Floor, if you would be interested in sharing that with them, that has that information on there.
Yeah, we have it, and I believe it's part of the backup online, or, yeah, but we have it. It's actually printed out on that table right over there. So thank you.
Okay.
So there is some transitional,
Well, effort, I think we're getting into like the more design, which is hopefully nice.
I would just want to get an understanding of the impact of the bottom line, if it's another 10% because of things like that, or if it's inclusive in this.
You mean those numbers? I would expect all those numbers to change between now, permitting, construction, and bid. I wouldn't hold, I mean, they're good numbers today, but what does the next few processes look like, and what, those are.
Those construction numbers or those design and construction numbers?
I think they're construction numbers, correct?
So, yeah, so the cost, and these are, at fiscal year 23 levels. It includes the material and labor costs for the alternatives, and it has like a related incidental task and mobilization fee associated with it. It has a small amount of contingency for risk and design changes. But I would say, as you go into like final design and go through permitting, it doesn't include any kind of permitting costs or anything like that, or any real estate costs. So, I mean, the numbers would definitely be subject to change. We more so wanted to get you kind of a ballpark and numbers out so we can kind of compare the different costs of the different alternatives.
So design is always pretty expensive. It can be, it just depends, right? So we all know that the next challenge is going to be permitting. Well, Army, I appreciate what you said at the beginning of the meeting regarding you write these reports to help us with that, and also help us with grants. So I appreciate, everyone in this room appreciates that. Will you all also help us with talking with the agencies on the permitting side? Is that something you can help with?
In my experience, we haven't been involved in that. Maybe Jim Stubbs would be the appropriate PSD from the Army Corps to kind of talk through what we can do on that lane. That'd be more of a project management task. But I don't know that we've done anything like that except for, adding clarifying information to our reports and kind of being there to answer any questions regarding the information we're provided as part of these reports.
And what you just said at the end is all we would expect, just to kind of help us if there are questions or clarifying statements or things like that, just to kind of help get it over the finish line. So, okay.
What just was said is confusing to me, that this $8 million number is just construction costs, that it doesn't include the design? Okay. The design would be in addition to this plus everything else. All right, thank you.
I have a question, and I don't know if scientists can assess this, but if we spend 8 to 50 million and do these alternatives, is there an idea of how long this is going to take us? I know this is nature we're facing, but I'm from back in the day with the Canadian walls, and the Canadian walls have failed. And so when is the next commission going to be looking at another 8 to 50 million dollars? Is there end?
I don't think anyone can answer that question.
Nobody knows how long this will take.
No. I mean, longer than the existing, we know that.
And there was, at one point, a suggestion of buying property, but that didn't show up in these alternatives.
Well, they looked at all that, So they looked at everything, and they came up with these alternatives. I think I think buying all the properties, let's just use Harbor Woods Village, it's going to be more than $2.4 million to buy all the properties along the creek. There's 40-something properties, I think, maybe even more, 44 or 45 properties in that area.
And here's where I'm going. Perhaps some of the residents won't even want that option. But if they did want that option and we spent that money, would the water just be able to flow? Or would it create problems elsewhere, anywhere?
I mean, think about what you're proposing. That would mean, let's take everybody that built a house along Tampa Bay, you know, with storms coming, you know, tidal surges, et cetera. I mean, we're talking about 2 or 3 properties maybe, but 40 properties along the creek, that the idea of buying a properties to allow a creek to flow freely, I mean,
This has been a problem for us for years, for 10 that I've been up here.
It's ongoing,
Such distress. And the problem was brought to them, I believe, I'm not a scientist, but from construction, that they had no impact. It came to them. And so I'm just looking at it, and again, I'm just exploring if we made that outlay, we bought those 40 properties, and again, this is all if. But if we bought those properties, would this creek then be able to flow, or is it going to then impact, as Commissioner Murr said, something else? I just don't know the domino effect here. But this is a lot of money. I'm not saying $8 million.
It's something like $18 million to buy that.
To buy the properties, and then here, up here, this 8 is just for construction. And so I can see that doubling. So anyway, I'm just throwing it out there as another thought. 15 million purchase, as opposed to what? The cost for these temporary things. Thank you.
But if you were spending $15 million and doing purchases, and you know, you had this person opting out, and this person opting in, and it wouldn't even. I mean, it's just people would decide to stay. How would you be able to stabilize it? Because you wouldn't be able to stabilize this side because they opted to leave. This side they opted to stay. So you're going to work on that side while free flowing the other. I mean, I just.
What's going on with the St. Pete Beach erosion? They have the easements, and the people can't agree.
Okay.
They all have to buy in or they don't. It's like, plus even if they did, we're here for at least $15 million.
I think it'd be a lot more than that.
So do we have any more questions for Ronnie?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I have one too. Go ahead.
I'm not sure exactly who to direct the question to the Army Corps, but do you guys have any experience in helping municipalities secure funding, whether it be federal dollars or state dollars, to pay for these recommendations or alternatives?
Hey, I can speak to that a little bit. This is Sarah. So like I mentioned in the beginning, we did have an FPMS report for the city of Greenville. And I don't exactly know where in Florida that is, but they did apply for a grant, and Jim Stubbs is our program lead for the project, and he assisted the county manager at the time with, you know, the language and the verbiage that needed to be put into the grant. So yes, if you guys need assistance with, you know, applying for these grants or, you know, any particular funding sources, we can assist with that. You can reach out to me or Jim Stubbs.
And do you know if that city ended up getting federal money or state money or both?
I believe it was state money.
Yeah, for federal funding, I mean, there's a couple ways to get federal funding, right? For this study, for instance, it was all federally funded for the planning study, but that's relatively cheap compared to the cost of construction. So the Army Corps, for instance, has Continuing Authorities Program, or CAP projects, that is a construction authority that we can move projects into design and construction. A lot of them are capped at around $10 million. But they have different authorities, and they have to meet the criteria. For instance, like a Section 14 would be emergency stream bank restoration of important infrastructure that's about to fail. And so just looking at these alternatives and these problems, I don't foresee any of these issues going into or qualifying for capped federal dollars. That is a construction authority, and then outside for the federal government not going through CAP, you have to get a project through like a WRDA document, the Water Resources Development Act, and get specific language for your project drafted into a bill funded by Congress. So I know typically, like the grant Sarah was talking about, would typically be like a state-funded grant. But federally, we're a little limited, but definitely, if y'all do have questions about that, you know, we can set a meeting with Jim Stubbs, would be the expert to talk about different federal funding options.
And one more question for me. If this report that you all put together was done by the private sector, what do you think the value of it would be?
I'm not sure if I'm really in a place to answer that question.
Yeah, just a question for Maurice. Based on your modeling experience on this, and getting back to the discussion on purchasing individual properties, and obviously water doesn't like making 90-degree bends. So if you're looking at, as a comparison between all of the vertical cutoff walls, was part of your evaluation perhaps looking at maybe the properties, single or double properties at the 90-degree bends to see if purchase of that and some kind of water control structure at that location, a pond or something like that, that could be used to either slow down the flow or collect some of that excess capacity during an event? Was any of that either included in the analysis, or would you think that looking at that might make a difference in slowing down the downstream velocities?
Yes, in fact, we looked at two different alternatives, right, exactly to your point. So we looked at immediately downstream of Harbor Woods Drive, we looked at the potential of acquisition of 10 properties that went around that 90-degree bend and converting it into, I believe it was about a 2-acre pond with a downstream control weir, 2-stage weir. And yeah, it basically eliminates velocity within that area, but there's no changes upstream, so it doesn't have any impact, you know, upstream of Harbor Woods Drive. So it's just an isolated scenario. And then similarly, we looked at, instead of going with a pond, by just again acquiring those 10 properties and then widening the channel. I believe it was on a 4-to-1 side slope for us through that area of acquisition. Similar results, just, you know, isolated reductions around the bend.
Okay, well, that's good information to know, because those discussions will come up, you know, what happens in individual site specifics. And obviously, since those have been looked at, your alternative to the long lengths of vertical cutoff wall seems to be your overall, not only recommendation, but based on those items that you've already looked at.
Yep, and those are all detailed in the engineering report and appendices. So it has all the figures and similar modeling results all tabulated within that, if you want to take a deep dive into those alternatives.
Thank you, Maurice.
Just the idea of purchasing, you know, properties and building ponds, not only the purchase of the property, but then the cost of mitigation, the pond development, that type of stuff.
And what
it's even that much more.
Well, and what he just said was it didn't change.
Right,
The
the
upstream
velocity is
properties
still
that you
the
need.
same.
We have to do them all, right, so then those are forced to do it.
Having figured in the additional cost if they bought 40 homes along the creek, because you couldn't just buy them and have a creek there, you'd have to.
I think the issue with ponds that we find all 40 is
Right.
select ones near the bend and trying to deal with that. Where the water's trying to come, instead of trying to make that bend, it would go into a pond, and it would be in a situation that the water downstream would need to be slower and less erosive and things like that.
I think you have to look at each property as $500,000. two properties, you're talking $1 million, and then you're talking about the cost to do the mitigation work. Which, again,
Are there more questions?
Do you want to open it up?
Yeah, so how much more time do you all have? Because we have residents that want to speak, and what we typically do in a meeting is we'll allow them to speak, and then after they're done, the commission may have more questions. So there won't be a back and forth per se with the residents, but there could be additional back and forth with the commission. Do you have time for that?
I have until 10.
Okay.
And then I'll have to jump off.
Renee has a comment.
Yep.
We have a question from staff.
Not really a question, it's a comment about impacts outside of these 7 areas. So we have previously approved the watershed management plan. So all of this information that we have from this report is going into our watershed management plan, which is citywide. So the impacts that you see here and everything that's affected in these 7 areas will be utilized in our citywide watershed management plan. So anything that's happening here, the models that you see, will be utilized to see what impacts those have citywide on our stormwater system. So you'll see that in the results of our watershed management plan and the vulnerability assessment. Okay?
Given that we have just over 15 minutes, I would like to allow the public to get in. So anyone from the audience that wants to be heard, I just asked we get 15 minutes. So can you keep your comments to 2 minutes?
Well, he might speak from the majority.
Just speaking for the
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna try real hard.
Just do your best. Just keep it honest.
All right, number one, stormwater runoff, which is what the study was addressing, is not the major issue associated with at least Harbor Woods Village. You're talking groundwater that's running through an unstabilized bank, very vertical. We constantly run, so we're undermining the ground. We're not seeing as much surface erosion, we're seeing underground. So what they're saying with regard to the vertical cutoff walls, it does a wonderful job with regard to allowing the stormwater run without eroding the bank, but it also stops this let's call it groundwater running to the drainage system without having a problem.
Let me
Yes.
jump in real quick. We got 15 minutes left.
Okay.
Is this for them?
This is,
I would
well,
say this.
okay.
We have plenty of time.
Yeah.
Well, the other,
We'll stay.
this
Yeah.
has to do with the gabing walls right now are not functioning, which is why we really need the cutoff walls to go the balance of the way. Otherwise we're just pushing the problem down the hill.
Well, half the homes don't even have gable walls.
But those parts are already
Yeah.
covered. That's not the problem. It's everywhere that has a problem. And to your point with regard to, how long will this last? And I agree with that. You really need a dedicated storm water system that just takes off the runoff. But that's, again, a different item. And, that's alternative.
Yeah.
Can you say your name and address?
Oh, I'm sorry. Gary Rosenberg, 93 Harborwood Circle.
Thank you.
For Morris, really quick, 100-year event, 1979, 19 inches in 24 hours.
Does anyone in the audience have any questions for the Army Corps of Engineers, since we only have room for 10 more minutes today? Okay, we have plenty of time for dialogue between the residents and the commission moving forward.
So we can let them go, and then.
Unless the commission, does anyone else have any more questions?
Staff? Okay. Well, thank you, for your work on this. We know it was a long process. We know there was a lot of, moving pieces, and, we're appreciative of the work you've done and the report you've given us, and, now our real work begins. So, thank you. Do you have any closing remarks or anything that Army Corps would like to say before you guys sign off?
Hey, I do have one thing. This is Sarah. I just want to say thank you guys for your time today. And, if you guys have any questions or anything that you want to follow up with, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to help. we'll be here through the long haul, applying for grants. So, me, Jim Suggs.
Yeah, we will be reaching out. I will not lose your contact information.
And just on behalf of all the people in the city, thank you all very much for all the work you put into this and for presenting it to us. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you. Okay,
All right, y'all have a good day.
so now Paul's in the back. Paul, you can come, yeah, he'll shut this down. So Mayor, it's up to you now, the rest of the meeting, if you want to do just like 3 minutes audience, be heard, whatever you want to do, or if you guys want to talk.
Let me first ask, do we have any time constraints from anyone up here?
I need to be done by 10:30.
Okay. We probably all have, okay, so we just, not gonna let this drag on too long. All right, so why don't we open it up to the audience, if you guys have anything you want to ask the commission, or take directly to us, now that we've done with the Army Corps of Engineers.
Yeah, Gary, if you want to talk longer, you can do it now.
Yeah, it's the same format as the usual.
Talking longer. We're all in the same boat. We want to have something.
Eric, you gotta do it on the mic, please. Yeah, that's all right.
We want a solution that's going to protect, the residents and be good for the city. I mean, that's a positive one. And the vertical cutoff walls, I did a lot of looking into them.
Sorry.
That's how you feel.
I was trying to.
Mic drop.
Anyway,
I'm sorry.
I looked into that, and I don't want us to run down a path that's not gonna solve everybody's problem. And like I said, stormwater is as far as runoff, is not the biggest problem that we have. And I've seen it from day one through now. It causes the erosion along the bank when we have the high velocities, but groundwater is killing us 24 hours a day, every day of the year. And the problem is that we have unstable banks. Just that simple. They're unstable, and the gabion walls are not supporting those banks. And that's what I've seen. I've seen people add soil to the top, and it just keeps on going down, and it just keeps on going into the creek, and then we spend money dredging it out. So we're hurting ourselves. We're not fixing the problem. The root cause of the problem was back in '79 when we had this 100-year vent. The decision was made somewhere in the group, Safety Harbor, to pull the trees, dredge it out to make it wider to handle the water. That didn't solve the problem, by the way, because I can still show you pictures of flooded banks, well over the banks, during normal afternoon rainstorms, because the whole system wasn't addressed at one time. So now that everything is sized at least reasonably to handle the water as far as runoff. What it's not sized or protected for is the groundwater running to the creek. Just that simple. So on your point with regard to what could we have done? Well, if we had a piping system that was only for the runoff, like sewer system goes in the drain, it doesn't go into the creek, it gets directed through a controlled mechanism, which should have been done as part of the plan for the development. I'm not just talking about Harbor Woods Village, I'm talking about all the development. That would have solved that problem. Then the creek could have stayed a creek, handled a little bit of runoff, handled the groundwater, because at that time it was just a swale with trees that held onto the ground, so there was no running of dirt. It was all staying put. But right now we've kind of boxed it in based on, let's call it, accepted or permitted arrangements with regard to builders or contractors or whatever. We're here. And that's how I look at it, is we're here. So the vertical cutoff walls at least functionally do the job. All right, it's probably the cheapest way to go. I looked at, if you're willing to dig up some roads and put in some piping and then redirect some of these drain lines, then you could probably have something and then fill the creek back in a little bit, so this way it's the creek. That's an alternative, but boy, that's a whole nother animal. This is probably, quote unquote, where we are today, a least expensive way of getting there. How long, like you said, how long will it last? I mean, I don't know, but I know it'll be a lot better than, number one, the gabion walls, because it won't be porous. So it'll, let's call it, it'll last my lifetime.
Well, it'll be better than no treatment at all on the.
Oh,
on
I
the
already
west
know
side.
that part, that's where I'm living. But I'm not looking at, just for me, I'm looking at the system. That's why I supported this study, which is the stormwater drainage system for the city. It's important for the community to have a good drainage system. Again, in '79, and I remember it vividly, everything was water around, and there were some homes that actually had water intrusion. But you couldn't get around anywhere. I mean, because there's nowhere for the water to go. But unusual set of circumstances, so I wouldn't call it the typical, and I haven't seen that level of water since that time. Again, hopefully 100 years. But anyway, the bottom line though is still groundwater, and it's everywhere, and it continues to run. And even going way back, I was watching, I saw the creeks back to '77, and walked that whole creek before anything was built there. And it was a little creek with just a little flow, and it never went dry, no matter what kind of drought we had, because the groundwater kept feeding it. And so, biggest part of the problem. And once we dredged, or once that let's call it creek was destabilized, it now created a nightmare for that long term, because this continually flowing of water just takes a little bit at a time, but it's all the time. So it's, yes.
Just to follow up to that, maybe it's to you, maybe it's to Renee, but obviously and I can appreciate what you're saying about the groundwater, and it would stop the groundwater, then at least there's some of it from permeating in.
And it's not to stop the groundwater, it's stopping the groundwater from carrying unsupported dirt. Because, you don't have that angle of repose where you can separate, which is what we had originally. So what's going on now, like when they have these vertical cutoff walls, the water's going to be there. Water, it's ahead now from the creek, so it's just going to go down, quote unquote, to 20 feet that they have it penetrating in the ground, and then come up the other way through paint. But it's all against solid materials, so it's not running anywhere. So it's permeating back up and then following in the creek. So you don't want to stop the water, it has to go somewhere. That's why we have a creek in the first place.
Oh yeah, that's my point.
No, I didn't say that.
The water now, instead of before permeating in, is gonna be,
It'll
be in the people's backyard all the way,
It
it'll be
won't.
higher, right?
It won't, actually, it won't be higher, because it'll rain, you'll have this water permeating down, but then it will try to equalize, water tries to seek its own level. So it's gonna reach whatever the normal quote-unquote creek level is at the time, and that'll be the water height at that point. Every time it rains, it's just, that's what happens.
So we wouldn't be exasperating
No.
people's backyard.
No, I looked at that part of it and I said, no, that doesn't happen, don't worry about that. And again, that's exactly why the creek is there in the first place, is that the groundwater found a place and the runoff. But way back then, when I moved in, there was the cattle and there was horses and there was, smaller roads, and there were no developments on Enterprise in 19, which is County Road 102. There was nothing. And there was the building cycle between 77 and 80 was enormous. And so irrespective of what was done on the creek at that time, didn't take into account the growth of the area. Nobody planned, in other words,
So
in
Gary,
fact,
if you were
yes.
sitting in one of these seats, what would you be advocating for?
Right now, I would definitely go with the cutoff walls, but all the way, because the people downstream, I've seen the problem. I've walked all those properties, and so there's no way that you can't stop where you are, because that water, when it does rain, it's gonna wanna run that way. Path of least resistance. It's a lot easier to go 5 feet than go down 20 feet and then come back up 20 feet. So, You know, so that, I mean, if I had my way originally, I would have taken County Road 102, and I would have put one hell of a pipe through it, and I would have ran our drainage to it. But that was not there. When I moved into the house, number one, I was young, the good old days. So I was young, starting a family, I was traveling off of work, so, you know, you never, before we bought the house, I asked the builder, you know, what about the creek? And he said, well, we did a study, and everything's sized right. You know, Harbor Woods Drive, there were 3 10-inch diameter pipes that went underneath there. That was it. That's what carried the water, and they never filled up, except for a 100-year rain. And then it didn't matter anymore because the water went over the road. You know, so I was fortunate that the road was only that high because we were spared water getting into our house because it could get over the road. Otherwise, we would have had water also. You know, so I think from an economy standpoint, the cutoff wall seemed to be the best approach, based on where we are, unless you want to, you know, say, hey, we want to dig up everything and put pipes in. And I see that being multiple problems, you know, not acquisition, just access.
It would also take longer to design that.
Yeah, but that's a different, yeah, and I mean, a lot of disruption.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not, let's face it, this is not neat. I mean, I don't like it anymore, I mean, because equipment's gonna have to get into the creek. They're gonna be there, it's gonna be a mess for a while. But the ultimate result will solve the groundwater issue and never have a problem with regard to stormwater. So, you know, and I see, you know, if the right materials are used, I don't see any reason why, you know, we're looking at something that's a 50-plus year sitting there. That would be my expectation, you know, based on, you know, experience. But it's, again, it still comes down to using good materials. You know, somebody screws up, you know, nothing like plumbing a house with poor copper and then having leaks, you know.
Follow-up to that.
Yeah.
The cutoff walls, are they impervious, or do they have?
No, they're steel. It's steel walls that they drive down. They're going to drive down 20, and then they're going to have it sit up, and then there's a concrete cap.
Oh, I see. So they're sheet piles, like.
Yes, that's what they renamed it. They renamed it. You know, the Army Corps of Engineers has a standard out there. You know, this is what it is. And then I looked up, and then now there's a new standard out there that they just renamed it. Anyway,
So they look like, you know, seawalls.
they look like seawalls. It's exactly what it is. And we don't have the salt aspect.
Right.
That's an issue. You know, when I was looking at this from the beginning, I looked at an interesting report that was done on, you know, water quality, and they took samples of the creek water quality, and one of them, there was a Bishop Creek, and Mullet for that matter, there was a comment in there saying, gee, you know, we took it under high velocity, high flowing runoff, and low, and the concentration of contaminants, solids, you know, particulates, in the low flow was high. And they didn't understand why. Because they weren't thinking groundwater. This groundwater, I'm telling you, this groundwater is elusive, and it has been neglected for years and years. But I think it's around about 2000 it really started becoming recognized. And if you go in there, you'll see a lot of things on soil piping and things of that nature. Another thing about this is that whatever we do has to be continuous and have that integrity, because like there's a drainage pipe across from my property that comes from Egret Terrace. Water comes rushing down that road. There's about a 30 or 40 foot elevation difference. It comes rushing down, and then it goes into this drainage pipe, comes across, and of course impinges on my side. But the property on that corner, that pipe provides a path for groundwater to hit the pipe and then run on the outside of it. And it's carrying his property sideways and then into the creek. So if you leave a gap, it's just asking for a different problem. So it's got to be continuous. It's got to be, you know, thought out in that regard. And that's why I raised, as soon as I saw that they stopped there, I sent a note saying, you really got to continue, you know, because otherwise all we've done is pushed it downstream and it hasn't gone away. And if we got equipment in the creek doing stuff, do it once. You know, just to come back, that's an expense that would be unnecessary.
Thank you very much.
That's my input for today.
Thank you.
Gary, we appreciate you being involved with this from
Well-
when we started, from the first letter.
Yeah.
It's been a long process, so thank you.
Listen, I'm here for the duration, as long as I hang in there, that's fine.
Thank you, yes.
Does anyone else wish to speak? Your name and address for the record.
I'm Rosemary Grossman, 3082 Hillside Lane. This is all well and good. This has to do with the present and going forward in the future. Our problem is the past. We have damage. So I just wondered, what do we do with the people? There were a lot of people who suffered in the past. What do we do? How do you help us? What can we do? That's my question.
Anyone else? All right, so we definitely have our work cut out for us.
Oh, yeah. Renee or Michelle, not to put you on the spot, do you guys have anything you want to share or add at this point in time? No? Okay. So let me kind of summarize for everyone what this, because, yeah, it's a tall task, right? Not just funding wise, but the first step, and staff, correct me if I say anything wrong, please, but the first step, really, we have $1.5 million that we set aside as like kind of to just set aside for whatever the next step is. Maybe it's asking for grant funding, maybe it's design, whatever it is. The first thing we need to do, and this has been the challenge from the beginning, is see what we can get permitted. That is the first challenge and the first step, because it does us no good to even spend $300,000 on a design if we cannot get it past the permitting agencies. And that's why I asked Army Corps of Engineers if they're gonna help us with that, because that is critical, and that is like the critical next step. Now, we have consultants that can help us with that process, so the way I see it is that we bring on one of our CCNA consultants, and we have them kind of rally all the troops to pitch this plan, at least for Bishop Creek and Mullet Creek. I mean, some of the other stuff, we gotta figure out the county, that's a whole nother discussion. And some of the smaller, lower hanging fruit, like you mentioned, Tall Pond, or Sheriff's Youth Ranch, some of those things are minor, and we can coordinate with our existing stormwater budget, so I'm not worried about those.
So you're talking about prioritizing.
Well, the priority is really Bishop Creek and then Mullet Creek. I mean, that's the priority.
That's our priority.
That's the priority. So, they're the two big ones, and they're the ones, so the idea would be to get a consultant to go with us and pitch this idea to all the permitting agencies that be. And they might say, yes, we'll permit it, but you gotta do this. Or yes, we'll permit it, but you have to do this. So we gotta have that discussion first, and that's like the next step. And then from there, we need to start designing it. So, and we have the money for those first two steps. We have money for permitting, and we have money for design. And then what we need to do, and we just secured a lobbyist, so what we need to do is we need to keep going after, whether it's state or federal funding or grant funding or what have you. We can also look at other funding sources. I mean, the commission can have this discussion later, but you can look at increasing the stormwater rate. You can look at borrowing money to get the project done sooner. You can look at borrowing money from yourself. You can look at moving money from another fund like Penny for Pinellas or something. So there's things we can do on the funding side, but I think the most critical path today is to get those permitting agencies to tell us that they will permit this. And then as soon as we get that okay and that clearance, then we start design.
So here's two questions. You want our lobbyist, is he also at the federal level? Or is he just
Our
more
lobbyist
the
is at the state level. We only contracted him for the state level lobbyist. So,
Okay.
but you and I can meet with Bill Arrakis
Right.
again, like we did to get this study done, and we can say, we need help.
we also had, we met with our state representative, and our state representative said, you should get a lobbyist. So it's like, even though we have that direct line of communication to Bill Arrakis, sometimes you need a lobbyist to hold their hand to move it through the entire process, because I don't know if they would do, I'm not suggesting right now we do that, but I just have a concern about, is that enough to have that direct relationship with Bill Arrakis? The other,
No, I think the Shoemaker Group also does federal law.
Okay.
Well,
So-
David Jolly's there, I think.
But keep in mind that whether it's federal or state, they want shovel-ready projects. And so this is a design concept, well, it's not even a design. This is a modeling concept
It has to be designed.
that has to be designed and permitted. And so,
And that takes a long time.
Well-
Sometimes permitting does.
well, we need permitting to happen first. We need to get the preliminary approval that this modeling and what they're suggesting can be permitted.
so my second question is does it make sense before we spend, hundreds of thousands, if not more dollars doing permitting and design, to get some kind of buy-in from whether it be the state or the federal government to say, hey, we understand you're moving down this road, we're open to it. Now, I'm sure we can't.
Problem is,
They want to show already.
show.
But just
But-
like some kind of like,
Well,
get buy in the process, like, hey, are you open to this?
I almost think that we can do those on parallel paths.
That's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah, like, I think that we can get the consultant to give us a green light on permitting and design at the same time that we're hitting up these state and federal, decision makers for funding. I think that can happen at the same time, because either way, it's gotta be designed. It can't be built until it's designed. So we need to start that process. We need to start that process as soon as possible. But we also need to make sure that we're not paying someone to design something that we can't get permitted. So that's kind of like a double-edged sword. Like we need to start the design now, but we need to make sure that we're not wasting money on a design that can't get permitted. And Gary has a question.
And in hold on one second, so you're worried about designing something that can't get permitted. So my worry is, we permitted, we design, and then there's the funding, like, that's, and I know we can't get any guarantees, it's just nice to know, like, what are our probability of getting funded if we spend all this money?
So,
I guess you gotta figure out, that's, you probably need to sit down with the lobbyist group that we just, retained and find out their thoughts and maybe, in other words, what buckets from the federal government, what buckets from the state government, and they could give us a better idea of probability versus, I mean, I don't know, I know the federal government's got certain criteria to meet those buckets, like he just was talking about from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So I think that we probably need to reach out to Shoemaker or whatever.
we can do that, and they know that this, look, we have applied for Bishop and Mullet Creek funding. When did we start this? 2020, Gary?
Yeah.
Yeah, come on up to the mic, but we've applied, well, real quick, let me-
Give the city manager, give him 1 second.
let me just finish the thought. So we've applied for state funding every year for, I believe, the last 3 years. So, the funding's gonna be a challenge. Funding's gonna be a challenge. We're gonna have to figure that out. But the state's not going to approve any funding, or we're not gonna be able to get even grants until we have, Michelle, and Renee, is that correct? We're not gonna be able to get grants until we have a design. So even applying for grants, which we will get grants for, I do believe we'll get grants. They might not cover a large portion, but we'll get grants for some of this.
Yeah.
But we can't do that without the design, and we can't do the design without knowing what will be permitted. So I really think the next stage is permitting and design.
I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with regard to the working with the permitting aspect, because you can't go forward unless you know direction, so that makes sense perfectly. But one of the things I think we're missing is we have to, I guess, rename this project from Bishop Creek and Muller Creek to Safety Harbor Stormwater Drainage System. It's an infrastructure. Everybody, when everybody talks about, oh, we're fixing a river or we're fixing a creek or we're doing something like that, and mentality-wise, they're not looking at this thing as, oh, this is critical issue to the populace, that there's a problem. Stormwater drainage is an infrastructure. And everybody talks about infrastructure now, so it just seems that if we don't help ourselves with how we nomenclature the task. Just the way it sounds.
Renee, can I ask you a quick question about the vulnerability assessment that can you kind of talk, because so we have these issues, and then we have the vulnerability assessment and what's the other thing called?
Watershed management.
Okay, thank you. So those two things are ongoing. I don't know the length of time, but at some point we will be able to apply for state funding. So can you kind of talk about that?
Correct.
Yeah.
So the vulnerability assessment is required by state law. And once that is completed, that opens up a door for us to apply for Resiliency Florida grants. So the state requires you complete this assessment first, and then this is the first time we're doing this assessment.
Yeah.
Correct, we just started. And once we complete that and list out a caveat of projects, then we can apply for grants for those projects for state funding. But you have to complete the assessment first based upon what your needs are in the city. So we're in process. So we have up to 2 years to get that completed by state law.
Right, we just did that in early September, right? That was
Correct.
part of what we
Correct.
decided on there, and that was at 180,000.
Right.
And where it's coming from.
So we have just started the assessment, and it's working together. So the watershed management plan and the vulnerability assessment are running concurrently. So those are working together to be completed. And once completed, then we submit them to the state, and then that opens up that door for that grant funding.
Wasn't that consultant like 18 months or something like that? It was a fairly
That's
expensive.
correct, because they have to model the entire city. So the modeling that you saw there, and when we started just for the creeks with the Army Corps, took a significant amount of time. So he's modeling the entire city. So that takes a significant amount of time to model the entire city to see where our needs lie.
So it's probably a larger extent than what this is, right? 'Cause it's
Correct.
not- He's putting in culverts and various things, right? You're gonna
Right.
have to look for the entire
The
city.
entire city to see where the needs
control
are.
structures would be necessary for resiliency.
And plus, they're mapping the city. So we have GIS, and stormwater is the newest layer in our GIS. Well, we need to make sure that's accurate. So he's going to actually map our stormwater system as part of this as well, and that takes time. So all of those components mixed in leads up to the 18 months.
Michelle, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but can you come up here and just kind of maybe explain how the agencies that we have to meet with for the permitting, and then also how long, let's just talk about Bishop Creek, because that seems to be the focus right now. So let's just talk about Bishop Creek. How long design, because we have to hire an outside engineering firm to design it. So realistically, like, the first question is, who do we need to get permitting through? And then the second question is, realistically, how long, and then you can give me a window, but how long to design a project like Bishop Creek?
So permitting would most likely be the Corps, the Army Corps, the Water Management District, probably FDEP.
Okay, so DEP, Swift Mud, and Army Corps. So 3 agencies. Well, hopefully Army Corps will approve it.
That's right. But
yeah.
they are the ones that take the longest. If you recall, the park took over a year. So yeah, you're right. Hopefully they don't take long because they already
They
know.
told us what to do. So DEP, Swift Mud, Army Corps. Okay, so really we need to have preliminary meetings.
Within the Water Management District, don't forget the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the National Historical. That's all part of it.
But the difficult ones are DEP, Swift Mud, and Army Corps. Okay, so we need to set up meetings with those 3 sooner than later to make sure that they would permit this design concept.
Pre-application meetings are
Okay.
must.
Are a must, okay. So, and we need to bring in a CCNA consultant to help us with that?
I don't, not necessarily.
Okay,
I think the city can handle it. We've done it before. And it helps if you have that person who's going to design it to be part of it, because they'll be coordinating with these agencies. So, yes, I think it would help to have a consultant along.
Well,
We
if it
could
would-
set up the pre-apps.
well, I think if it would help and that the costs, and we have budgeted funds, so I think if it would help, then we should probably do that, because, and we need all the help we can get. And then the second question is, realistically, so residents have a realistic timeframe, like, how long does it take to design a project like Bishop Creek? Forget about Mullet Creek, just Bishop Creek. Window.
I would say over a year. I'd say a year.
Okay.
And if you do it in phases, maybe not, you would do phases of, I'm thinking just, if you would help, yeah, if you would agree, I think a year or maybe a little more than
Okay.
for this larger one.
So really, we need to get in front of the agencies, like, as soon as possible, with the CCNA contractor who could potentially design it at our side, and then, assuming they say yes, then bring back a design contract for the city commission to approve, because it's gonna be, it's gonna be a percentage of the budget, right?
You could say 25%, I'm seeing.
So it's gonna be $300,000 to design it. So, and you're right, those weren't included in those costs.
Right.
So we have 1.5 in there right now. So, and this was advertised as a commission meeting, right, Rachel?
Yes.
Okay, so we're not asking you for action, but if you want to take action, you could. But my recommendation is that you direct staff to schedule the pre-application and permitting meetings and bring in the CCNA consultant. That will be within my spending authority for that meeting, so that we can do that without your, approval. And then, assuming those go well, bring back to you a contract for design.
Keep in mind, pre-apps are now 2 months out with a lot of these agencies, so we can get that all rolling to set the meetings up before.
We can request that today. It's just gonna take time to get on their schedule.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, well, no, to get on their schedule.
No, I mean, a year.
Yeah, we just
Just to get it shovel ready to.
Well, that's my point, is like, so when we talk about funding and when we talk about all that, like our lobbyist wants to help us try to get funding, but until that design's done and we have permitting and we're like, all right, we're ready to go, they're just gonna keep kicking the can down the road.
So are we sure this is a solution to this? What they presented here is a solution? I mean, I know they're scientists and engineers and everything like that, but obviously, at the end of the day, they're gonna put something out, regardless of, are we sure this is gonna work?
And the consultant
Because-
may offer other alternatives as well.
What's that?
Consultant may offer other alternatives.
Consultant may have other alternatives.
Or the permitting
Because-
agencies may have
because-
other alternatives.
Yeah.
I mean, years ago, when we did the geo-webbing, the gable and all that, we thought that was gonna work. So,
And at the time,
At that point, there was.
I mean,
Right.
well, and at the time, that's all we could get permitted. So at the time, and these agencies change their rules and all this, but that's why we went with, if back then, they would have permitted these, then we'd have some of these already. We wouldn't, so.
Just a cautionary note based on experience, that the core people that were being worked on, they're the modeling group, but they're not the permitting group, right?
That's right.
And the assumption would be is that one is done so that the other one will just stamp it and move. My experience is that it's a fresh start, it's a complete look, and what's been reviewed and presented is in accordance with traditional methods. But as was said, the consultant and the permitting agency may come up with a totally
Two
different.
different departments within the Army Corps,
Right,
right?
right.
and I don't think, again, when we went through, I remember with the gabling and all the stuff we did, it's like, you just, until you do it, you don't know what other problems you're gonna create downstream. So, you know, we have 6 questions, but we really don't know until it's there. And then,
Well, that's some of what Renee said. Some of the vulnerability assessment will model that, and they'll use this data. So
Right.
they'll be able to say, okay, if this happens, what will happen downstream? So,
right,
so
the designing, the
Yeah.
engineering group that designs.
yeah. But I guess, I mean,
I think the design is too early.
the design of what?
I think the idea of reaching out to the agencies, to have the pre-op meetings, to look for determining permits and things like that. But to try to go down the engineering design for what was just presented, I think it's too early to do that now because it may morph into something different.
Well, we wouldn't know that until after those meetings.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, but after but I guess my point was we wouldn't do both at the same time. We would do those meetings first, get the feedback, and then based off of that feedback, come to you, present that to you, and then present to you a contract for design based off of that feedback.
So are you looking for a motion from the
I
commission
don't,
right now, or just?
well, it's within my spending authority, so I mean, you don't really have to do a motion, but it's just a consensus. I mean, I think the next step is really to direct staff to set up these meetings with the permitting agencies and one of our CCNA consultants that eventually could design this. It's the way you procure consultants through the state law. It's just called CCNA.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I missed it.
she can tell you what each letter means.
Negotiation Act.
Yeah,
Okay.
continuing contract negotiation.
You
Act.
guys we had to go through 2 meetings with you guys.
Yeah. So that would be my recommended first step, to at least get on the schedule. Like, we can request those things today or Monday, we can request those meetings. Michelle's right, like, we're at their mercy when they schedule those meetings. But we can then bring in a CCNA consultant, which we have ready, we can pick one out that has experience in just this type of stuff. They'll go with us and we'll report back to you what they say. That's really the next step.
Seems reasonable.
Let's go with the next step, but I just want to make sure this is, once we dive into it, you know, we got to dive in head first. We got to make sure that we know what we're doing, you know, and we're going to be relying on this information or the consultant's information to go the right route. I mean, we definitely, I'm all for fixing the problem, but I don't want to create more problems or maybe not even fix the problem, you know.
Well, the beauty is the backup information has multiple alternatives that they looked at. What we talked about with ponds and various things, so the consultant will get all that too, and maybe either evaluate what's been done and say, well, I think they missed something here, or say, it's already been done, it's reasonable, this is the approach, right? So that's a very valid point.
So is, and I know we're talking about, I guess you would term this as creek restoration, but, so you're gonna kind of secure the banks, make sure there's not further erosion, but one of the residents got up and said, you know, so are we gonna bring in, I mean, people have lost considerable amounts of their property, so is this, and I didn't hear them talk about, well, we're gonna bring, you know, we propose bringing in fill dirt here to fill in this backyard to move the creek over this way, or, you know, so there are people, and I know from the campaign last time, there were people, North Bay Hills that were talking about their whole, you know, backyard sinking in the creek, so when we're, I guess, securing the banks, are we also going to be, because I guess I should have asked that, I didn't ask.
Well, I asked that, like, during the process, because I even asked, like, would it make sense to drive the sheet piles behind the gable walls and, like, right behind them, so that you take care of the erosion concerns, but then you also have, like, double protection. And I think, Michelle and Renee can correct me, but I think the idea is to limit the impact of the area to where the creek is now. But restoration on the other side, that wasn't really talked about.
Right.
So, is that correct?
I just don't want to give residents a false sense of, hey, they're gonna patch up my yard that just
What-
disappeared into
what-
the creek.
Well, I think some residents aren't concerned about necessarily their yard, they're concerned about property
House in the
damage.
pool.
Yes, property damage that has occurred over the years, not, I,
Their yard
I-
continues
well-
to sink and slide into the creek and the house is starting to crack. before it
and from
starts.
speaking to a lot of these residents up there, it seems like the ones that have been there a while, they either are constantly putting dirt in their backyard, or they just said, forget it, I'll do that later, you know? So, but each resident's different, and,
Right.
and each resident might have different issues or concerns, so they're not all the same either. And some, again, some to the east of the road have gabion walls, and to the west of the road don't, and so there's different concerns depending which
So I
backyard
just
you're in.
would want to be transparent and clear to the residents that this is a project to halt future, I guess, erosion and future potential of their house and pool sliding into the creek essentially.
What?
Not to patch up or repair or,
What-
I mean, this is just to keep the banks where they are.
Well, and keep in mind, it's all private property in this area.
Right.
And we have easements on the east side of the bridge. We don't have easements, I don't believe, on the west side. I don't think they'll be hard to get. I think if we go to do this project, I think the residents will
No
agree.
consent to it.
Yeah, but we only have easements on the east side where the gabion walls are now, I believe. We can, yeah, so we don't have, so like, Gary, I don't think we have an easement in your backyard, Gary. I don't think we do.
I've got it, well, on my deed, on the plot, there's a 20-foot easement.
Well, it's for the flow of water.
It's, yeah, but it's 20 feet that I was not allowed to construct anything in the way.
Yes.
So the creek could be serviced.
Yeah, but there's not an easement for us to put something there, to construct something. So we would have to, we've done this before, we would have to do easements. If we get to that point, I think the residents will say thank you.
Everyone who I spoke to said, that's not an issue.
Yeah.
And if you don't do it in their particular property, they can have a disaster, so I think we can get past that.
But hey, the good news is, because you all have probably read about the Army Corps easements with beach renourishment and stuff throughout the county. These are city easements. These are not Army Corps easements.
I just point out, we're just about 10:30.
Okay. I think you all have enough information. I think, so I don't need a vote, but I think our next step is what I'm hearing is to set up the meetings, bring in the CCNA consultant, and report back to you.
Do you have that in PowerPoint? Or do you have that presentation?
If we don't, we can get it. Would you like us to
Can you send it to me?
Yeah.
Do we not have enough backup?
I don't know.
They provide us,
Okay, can we ask for it? So
We didn't receive their PowerPoint, but I can ask them to.
we'll ask them for it, we'll send it out. Gary, I'll get you a copy too.
All right, meeting's adjourned.
Thank you. Everyone have a good Friday. Appreciate your time, guys.
Friday.
This was a lot to
It
talk
doesn't take
about.
out our
good.
sewers.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of discussion.
I don't think,
Getting there.
Cliff, what would a Cat 5 hurricane do to these vertical walls?